La terza preparazione che vedremo oggi è
The third preparation we're going to see today is a very well-known Sicilian cannolo. We will see mostly the shell part, but we will fill one in the final parts to see the main features of a Sicilian cannolo. We're talking about a product that has its main origin in very ancient times. So there are a lot of legends that make us think about the origin of cannoli, but this is kind of true for any dessert of Italian tradition or any dish of the Italian tradition. So it's very difficult to outline an origin of a traditional dish. So we should get back to times in which the transmission was very different from what we have today. So clearly, we like a little bit of romanticism to have a memory to understand where everything might have started. They say that it was prepared directly by the wives of Saracen colonizers. And they also say that it was made for the first time in Sicily from women who used some barrels to roll the shells of the cannoli. It is a carnival dessert, but since it is extremely important and it is a PAT product in Italy, it is a traditional territory product we're talking about. Such a popularity that brought this dessert to have to be very, very commonly consumed in our country, and it is eaten throughout the whole year. So when we order or buy some desserts in pastry shops, we always have some Sicilian cannoli. So we can always buy them throughout the whole year. It is a dough where we work with everything together to have a small base of gluten that gives us the main structure. But at the same time, we have the fat part that allows us to have a lot of friability. We prefer to have some folds here too, because both, as we explained before, the bubbles that come out during the deep frying depend on how we incorporate air during the preparing phase. So it's important to fold it at least 4 to 5 times. We have cocoa, unsweetened cocoa that we will need for the color, to have that tone of deep brown. That's classical. We have marsala that gives some color, and we also need it for the great perfumes of the product, and sugar. So, a 00 flour. We're going to sift the powders together. We're removing some grains. Then we're going to insert the butter. We're not adding other types of aromas because we'll do a stuffing, aromas, and whatnot. So we need a more neutral shell. Sugar, a little bit of salt. And then we're going to insert the marsala, taking our hook. So marsala goes in. Marsala is a liquor. For those who don't know, it is Italian. So always keeping our working surface clean. As we're waiting, we're going to prepare our plastic film to then add the dough, which will be ready.
andiamo a alzare un po' il nostro prodotto. Quando vedete che fate fatica in questo modo, cosa possiamo
When you see that it's kind of difficult, what we can do,
quindi facciamo fatica a farlo aggrappare, ci serve
so maybe the dough is not so much so it doesn't stick to the hook, we need a vehicle that can move our product better. So we're going to take our leaf paddle.
Quindi dicevamo, ci prendiamo la foglia per migliorare, soprattutto su prodotti
To improve
contenuti come peso, per andare a migliorare il movimento che andiamo a fare.
the movement and the incorporation. As we notice that the mixture starts clinging, we can use the spiral hook. Meanwhile, we're going to take our lard. As usual, we're going to grease
Andiamo a ingrassare
our plastic film.
la pellicola. Vi consiglio sempre di fare come abbiamo visto
So as we've seen with frappe, but also for short crust, avoid using a bowl
abbiamo bisogno
because we need to push the dough nicely during the cooling phase in the fridge. This will allow us to be quicker.
di fare prima. Perfetto, sì, più che sufficiente.
So as you're noticing,
Andando pian piano il
the mixture
composto si sta
is starting to come together,
spesso,
creating a sort of homogeneous mass.
perfetto.
Now we can change instrument and finish the
Terminare la lavorazione
preparation with the spiral hook.
in questo modo. Ogni tanto gli diamo una girata, se vedete che il composto fa fatica a lavorare
If you see that the mixture doesn't really come together, stir it every now and then.
in questo modo, vedete, piano piano.
Always keep your product under control.
Da qua andiamo a terminare la preparazione a mano, quindi prendiamo il nostro composto,
So we're taking a mixture just like this on the working surface. We're going to move our machine, always without adding any powder,
polveri di qualsiasi genere, vedete in questo modo, dolcemente, sempre
always alternating
dando spinte, diciamo, a momenti di riposo.
pressure to some moments of rest. It is a quite tough and resistant dough. Perfect. Now
Da qua andiamo
we're going to push it.
a schiacciarlo, anche se lo vedete
So you can see the surface.
sulla superficie, no?
It is a little bit more rough, but it's all normal. We're going to fold it. So we stopped with the kneading a little bit before because we prefer, even in this case, layering our base to make cannolo shell. So we're going to move
Stiamo la nostra
our base
base per andare a fare la copertura del nostro
to cover it with film. We're going to push nicely,
vedete, per bene. Facciamo, diciamo così,
letting the fat
il grasso in tutta la
cover the whole surface, and then we're going to close. When you close, always remember to push a little bit so that we remove eventual air that we might have inside.
incastonata all'interno.
The other side, again pushing, and then we're going to close.
E poi andiamo a chiudere in questo modo.
And now we're going to let it rest 40 minutes, 1 hour in a positive blast chilling, or 3 hours, 3 hours and a half in the fridge. Now we're going to shape our cannoli. So I'm going to take our dough, that's out of the fridge. As usual, when you put doughs to rest in the fridge, always remember to eventually tampen them with a little bit of absorbing paper, maybe the excess of humidity that you might have. So we will form a little bit more clumps of flour in the beginning. We must be careful about that. So some flour. So we're going to flatten it to favor the insertion in the dough sheeter. The cocoa makes it quite, it is the thing that makes it quite harsh and resistant. And now we're going to start sheeting it. Again, a little bit of flour. We're going to move it nicely. We're going to make some folds here, like this. Re-rolling it a bit. Elongating it a little bit more, so making our barrels a little bit tighter. Every time you roll it out, control the outside humidity layer. Of course, don't add too much flour. You will notice, compared to so as we go on, we're going to have a structure that's smoother compared to what we had before. It's smoother and more compact. We're going to do this 4 times because we have a dough that's quite rigid, so we risk to favor the breaking of the dough. So this is the 3rd time. As we go on, the dough will tend to dry up more and more. So we're going to use flour only when, by rolling it out, we have the perception and the dough is not sliding. Enlarging a little bit the barrels of our dough sheeter, turning it on. Always be careful when you put the dough in the machine. Avoid to get your hands close to the barrels, because you might really hurt yourself. This is the last time we're folding it. So last fold. So spreading it as usual. We will get to a thickness of around 2 to 3 millimeters, so it always depends on how thick you want them during the cooking. If you want it to be a little bit softer or more rigid. can see how the mass is much smoother compared to previously. A little bit of flour, making the tightness. So closing the barrels a little bit more. So every dough sheeter has different thickness values, so try to monitor what it is visually and by touching it what the right thickness is. So maybe changing machine you might have different values. A little bit more flour. Just a little bit because we're almost finished. Just use the one we already have, just moving it around. And we're going to make the final thickness.
Perfetto, lo facciamo scivolare. Adesso spengiamo la nostra macchina, andiamo a spostare un attimo, andiamo a...
So we're going to control there's the right sliding underneath. We're going to clean the surface nicely, and we're going to start the shaping part. So once we have our dough, we're going to remove the excess of flour. We're going to use some steel barrels that are nice and greased with some lard, spray butter or butter. I advise you to use lard because it is a type of fat that holds high temperatures better. Remember to just add a little bit and clean it with some paper to remove the excess. We're going to use our pasta cutter and the barrel. They are both proportional to how big you want your cannoli to be. These are barrels to make some smaller cannoli compared to the classical shape. So we're going to cut and see if we are obtaining the shape that's necessary for us. We're going to pull them just slightly. It is not an oval, just slightly pushed. I'm going to take our mold, barrel mold, and now we're going to slightly pull by pushing on the barrel, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Before we deep fry them, what I advise you is to push a little bit more on this part, because anyways, maybe there's a little bit more flour, or so we're sealing nice and tightly to avoid that any flour that might be present might let our product open during the deep frying. If you have a mixture that's a little bit dry, you can wet the sealing point with some water or maybe a little bit of egg, but just a little bit. So again, taking our disc, just pulling it very gently. So I'm going to place and pull on one side, letting it adhere nicely. And we're going to pull the other side too. We're going to see it a couple times more. So pulling slightly, taking the barrel, putting it in the center, pushing, pulling and adhering it, letting it perfectly adhere, and pushing on the sealing part. Last time.
minuto e accompagniamo, vedete, tirando leggermente la parte sopra e preghiamo.
Now we can directly fry them in warm oil at 175 degrees. We're going to let our cannoli cool down, and then when they will slightly swell and seared, we will be able to then remove the barrel when the shape is nice and homogeneous to control that in the internal part there is the right cooking. And this is it with the shaping of the cannoli.